Morning. We'll call the meeting to order. Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics, meeting number 91. And pursuant to Standing Order 1083H7, briefing on net neutrality. This morning we have Rogers Communication, Quebecer Media Incorporated, Bell Canada, and TELUS. And I just have to let the committee know we need about 5 to 10 minutes for committee business at the very end. Just to consider a PIPED on the draft report. Just some formalities there, but we'll get started. 5 minutes, starting with Rogers.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Pam Dinsmore, and I am Vice President, Regulatory Cable with Rogers Communications. Rogers welcomes the opportunity to provide input to the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. My remarks will cover the recent developments in the United States with the FCC repealing its 2015 Open Internet Order, as well as the net neutrality regime in Canada. I will start by reiterating that Rogers fully supports net neutrality. All legal content must be treated equally by Internet service providers. We were the only major ISP to support the CRTC's differential pricing practices decision. We believe the Internet is a vital resource in our digital economy. Businesses, consumers, and families deserve fair and equal access to the Internet pipe. Internet service providers, or ISPs, should not be allowed to abuse their position and act as gatekeepers, giving privileged access to this vital resource to a select few. Canadians win when they have the freedom to make their own choices and are not artificially forced to use a particular product or service and are not subjected to their ISP determining winners and losers in the online environment. In 2015, the Federal Communication Commission's Open Internet Order classified broadband and wireless services under Title II of the Communications Act as telecommunications services. This moved jurisdiction away from the Federal Trade Commission over to the FCC. The order prohibited carriers from blocking, throttling, or offering paid prioritization of Internet traffic. On December 14, 2017, an FCC panel voted along party lines to repeal the 2015 Open Order, thereby eliminating all net neutrality rules. It replaced them with a new transparency rule of disclosure. Blocking, throttling, and fast-laning or prioritizing content is no longer banned as long as the Internet service provider informs its customers of its policy on an easily accessible website. The FTC will be responsible for policing the accuracy of disclosures, and the FCC will enforce the requirement that ISPs make disclosures. The FCC order is still making its way through the legislative process in the two houses and is likely to be the subject of legal challenges. At this time, we do not believe that these changes in the U.S., if they are ultimately passed into law and upheld by the courts, will have an impact on Canadians' access to U.S.-based websites or services. But like many others, we are following developments very closely. Unlike in the U.S., net neutrality in Canada is already well protected by our current statutory and regulatory regimes. These Canadian safeguards are based on the common carriage principles enshrined in Section 27(2) of the Telecommunications Act. They ensure that no carrier will give an undue preference to themselves or another party or subject any person to an undue disadvantage. The CRTC has used this authority in a series of key decisions to ensure the fair and equal access of information. The first decision dates back to 2009, where the Commission set out its Internet traffic management practices. In doing so, the Commission recognized that there are reasons why carriers may need to manage the traffic that flows through their networks, but at the same time sought fairness and transparency around any practices the carriers might use. As such, the Commission allowed carriers to engage in traffic management practices, but only where an entire class of traffic was treated in the same manner and only where there was full and transparent disclosure of the practice. Subsequently, in 2017, the Commission's decision on differential pricing practices related to Internet data plans reasserted this strict net neutrality approach. In virtually all aspects, it reflected the position put forward in the proceeding by Rogers. The CRTC determined that, by prohibiting differential pricing practices that favor specific content or a specific class of subscribers, all stakeholders are treated fairly by ISPs. Pursuant to the CRTC's decision, carriers are not permitted to zero rate or advantage specific traffic other than account management and billing traffic. Rogers believes that, by virtue of Section 27(2) of the Telecommunications Act, the CRTC has all the necessary tools it needs to protect net neutrality in a fast-changing environment while maintaining the flexibility to adapt to future changes occasioned by new technologies. As an example, the next evolution of wireless service, known as 5G, may require a flexible approach to ensure continued innovation. With 5G, certain services will require different levels of connectivity. For example, connected cars and remote medical services will require higher reliability and lower latency levels than networked parking meters. The current regime will allow the CRTC to make these essential accommodations that will promote innovation without endangering fair access to information. As such, we do not consider that any changes must be made to the Telecommunications Act to, in some way, enshrine net neutrality in Canada. We believe it is already enshrined appropriately. I look forward to any questions you may have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Dinsmore. Next up, Denis Ballant from Quebecer.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Denis Ballant. I'm Vice President, Regulatory Affairs for Telecommunications at Québecor Media. I'm representing Videotron this morning, a wholly owned subsidiary of Québecor Media. Videotron thanks the members of the committee for the invitation to appear before it to discuss net neutrality. Before entering into the heart of the matter, allow me to, by way of introduction, indicate to you that the Videotron is the first and primary ISP wired provider in Quebec with over 1.6 million subscribers. We also have a very significant place in the growing market in Quebec of wireless, and we've decided for strategic reasons in the years 2000 to integrate wireless into our affairs. More recently, we've attained the 1 million client mark for wireless telephony services. None of these successes would have been attained without massive investments on our part. To begin with, Videotron has invested over $1.1 billion in its cabled network over the last 5 years. And for wireless, it's also invested, since 2008, over $2.3 billion in the acquisition of licenses for mobile spectrum and the construction and upgrading, continuous upgrading of its wireless network. Videotron invested such, all the while maintaining an excellent reputation for the quality of its services. Videotron recently has been recognized, and this for a 12th consecutive year, as the telecommunication undertaking the most admired by Quebecois, according to a Léger survey. Now, to get to the heart of the matter this morning, net neutrality. As you all know, there's potentially as many definitions of net neutrality as there are commentators who are impassioned by the subject. If you've been following the debate sufficiently long enough, you'll know that there are two recurrent themes: the importance of treating traffic in a non-discriminatory manner, and that the operators of these networks should not dictate to the citizens what they may have access to on the net. These two themes are two concepts which are already part of Canadian law. In fact, both are to be covered by the Telecommunications Act, specifically, Articles 27(2) and 36 of the Act. The CRTC already has the discretionary authority to allow it to apply net neutrality. The challenge, of course, for the CRTC consists in determining how to exercise this authority in the context of the general overall policy objectives that it is mandated to ensure. In Canada, these policy objectives are found in Article 7 of the Act and have a whole series of social and economic objectives. Among these objectives, expansion of services and networks of high quality and affordable in all regions of the country, competition, both nationally and internationally, research and development, and innovation. It's well known that Internet technology is evolving at a rapid pace. The rhythm of this change is increasing as we speak. For example, wireless services are at the peak of revolutionizing all with 5G, Generation 5, new technology which will transform not only the industry, the wireless industry, but also a number of other elements called the Internet of Things, economic sectors, automobiles, and agriculture. New opportunities will arise, of course, in public services, including telehealth and telemedicine. Videotron wants to be part of this revolution and evolution. Such participation will require massive investments in infrastructure, but also, and specifically, a flexible regulatory framework, a practical framework, will not close the door to innovations before we determine if they're attainable or not. We'd invite you to reflect on the discretionary authority that the CRTC already has in matters of net neutrality, and listen cautiously to the various points of view on this issue. You will have to determine which of the various proposals that are put forward to you will stimulate innovation and risk-taking by those who will build these new networks. And this is the only way that the public interest will be best served. I thank you for your attention.
Mr. Lalonde. Next up, Bell Canada, Mr. Malcolmson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Honourable committee members, my name is Robert Malcolmson. I'm Senior Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at BCE. Thank you for your invitation to provide Bell's views on the topic of net neutrality. Bell is Canada's largest communications company, employing 51,000 Canadians and investing $4 billion per year in advanced networks and media content. These investments allow us to provide advanced communications services that form the backbone of Canada's digital economy. Today we serve approximately 3.8 million high-speed internet customers. We are also in the midst of a very ambitious fibre-to-the-home deployment that will expand our high-speed fibre footprint to approximately 4.5 million locations by the end of 2018. We're also expanding our high-speed internet service into rural and remote areas. Whether it is Flin Flon or Lynn Lake in Manitoba, Stratton First Nation in Ontario, Mont Saint-Pierre in Quebec, or Cook's Harbour in Newfoundland and Labrador, both on our own initiative and in partnerships with federal and provincial government programs, we are investing capital to bring more Canadians the infrastructure they need to participate in the digital economy. We are also a key supporter of Canada's cultural and democratic system. BCE is the country's largest television provider, with operations that include Canada's largest over-the-air television network, CTV, many of Canada's most popular specialty channels, and Crave TV, our over-the-top video streaming service. Our broadband network also supports Fibe TV and Fibe Alt TV, a low-cost, application-based TV service that does not require a traditional TV set-top box. In 2017 alone, Bell invested approximately $900 million in the creation and production of Canadian programming. As a media company, and one of Canada's largest ISPs, Bell understands and supports the concept of net neutrality. What does this mean? As Minister Baines said in January, net neutrality means, and I quote, an open internet where Canadians have the ability to access the content of their choice in accordance with Canadian laws. In other words, our government believes that all legal content must be treated equally by internet service providers. That's why our government has a strong net neutrality framework in place through the Section 27 of the Telecommunications Act prohibits any form of unjust discrimination, and Section 36 of the Act prohibits blocking or interfering with the content or meaning of any of the traffic an ISP carries, except with the permission of the CRTC. Under these provisions, the CRTC has developed and enforced a robust net neutrality framework. That framework ensures Canadians have access to the free flow of legal content described by Minister Baines by prohibiting ISPs from prioritizing internet traffic, throttling traffic, and zero-rating data. The CRTC also regulates differential pricing practices and requires ISPs to obtain the prior authorization of the CRTC before controlling or influencing the content of a message that travels over the network. It is important to appreciate that regardless of the changes to the net neutrality policies in the U.S., Canadians' access to and use of the internet will remain governed by our domestic net neutrality rules, which are developed and overseen by the CRTC. Canada is also well positioned as a result of the competitiveness of our broadband network market. Canadian ISPs operate in a highly competitive environment, with the vast majority of Canadians being able to access high-speed internet over both multiple wireline and multiple wireless networks. There are also dozens of resellers who use regulated access to our networks to compete aggressively on price and unlimited service offerings. I know that one of the questions you and your colleagues may be considering is whether changes should be made to the Telecommunications Act on this topic. We do not believe that any changes to the Act are needed in this regard. As I mentioned, Canada already has some of the strongest net neutrality laws in the world under the existing Act. There's no need to change them simply because there has been a change in the United States. In our view, this is one of those situations that falls into the old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Last week, you had Christopher Seidel, the Executive Director of Telecommunications for the CRTC, appear before you. We agree with him that enshrining something more rigid than the current provisions in the Act could pose a risk to future innovation, or could quickly become outdated during the development of 5G and the Internet of Things. In our view, this is simply too big a risk to take. Thank you for the opportunity to provide our views on this topic, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Malcolmson. Next up with TELUS, Mr. Woodhead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Ted Woodhead, and I am the Senior Vice President and Strategic Policy Advisor at TELUS Communications. With me today and to my left is Dr. Michael Guerriere, Chief Medical Officer, Vice President and Chief Strategy Officer with TELUS Health. Net neutrality stands for the principle that all internet traffic should be treated equally. There should not be fast lanes and slow lanes, or one group unjustly discriminated against or unduly preferred over another in the management of internet access services. Canada's Telecommunications Act gives the Canadian Radio, Television and Telecommunications Commission broad discretionary powers to ensure all rates are just and reasonable, and that the offering of any service or rate to a person is not unjustly discriminatory. The principles of net neutrality are thus fully embraced by the Act and the regulatory policies put in place by the CRTC. While how to address net neutrality is not an issue in Canada, the broader issue of how other non-neutral policies can impact the provision of innovative technological solutions for services vital to Canadians wherever they live is an important issue, and one that is critical, in our view, for Canada and Canadians. Preferring certain companies over others in auctioning spectrum assets through spectrum set-asides has led to spectrum trafficking and the allocation of urban and rural spectrum on a preferential basis to carriers who will not, for the foreseeable future, deploy it, if ever. Why is this important? And why should you be concerned by this? In essence, it is a question of fairness and the proper management of a scarce public resource. There are many analogies between net neutrality and spectrum neutrality. The rationale behind the two concepts is the same. Discrimination brings similar results in that it materially impacts the provision of innovative broadband solutions. Giving more 5G spectrum to some players is no different than biasing internet bandwidth flows. Preferential policies, in this instance spectrum set-asides, where only a category of companies can bid on extremely valuable and scarce spectrum, distort auction outcomes and oftentimes lead to spectrum being allocated to carriers who will not deploy it. In the current draft consultation paper issued by Innovation, Science and Economic Development in August of last year concerning 600 megahertz low-band spectrum, the department proposes to set aside 30 of a total 70 megahertz of available 600 megahertz spectrum for mobile broadband, 43% of the available spectrum. The set-aside subsidy is for regional operators, including well-financed cable companies such as Shaw, Videotron, and Eastlink. 600 megahertz is important spectrum, especially for rural and remote areas. This is because it can travel long distances between towers and cover large geographic areas. It will be important for rolling out 5G in rural areas. The government should not pick winners or losers by leaving certain companies in the slow lane.
It might be helpful to examine how non-neutral policies will impact the delivery of a range of health services and why fair access to spectrum is critical to the effective delivery of healthcare today and in the future. Applications will be enabled as 5G networks are deployed over the next few years. 5G networks using wireless spectrum, including the 600 megahertz band, will ensure remote patient treatment, better data accuracy, greater patient empowerment, and better patient outcomes, most particularly in rural areas. To put this in context, when we look ahead to what a world of 5G will offer, we break it into three unique use cases. The first is called Enhanced Mobile Broadband, which will empower things like home and remote health monitoring, remote imaging diagnostic applications, and virtual reality training for physicians. The second is massive machine-type communications, which will be a true enabler of e-health, the Internet of Medical Things, smart buildings, hospitals, and cities. The third and final contribution of 5G is what we call ultra-reliable and low-latency communications, which will empower remote surgery, autonomous vehicles, including ambulances, and vehicle-to-vehicle communications. For Canadians, 5G will enable more equitable access to quality health care at affordable prices, especially in rural regions. This is why fair access to 600 megahertz and other spectrum is critical to harnessing and leveraging these innovative applications and technologies, and to make them available to the broadest number of Canadians, both urban and rural alike. At TELUS Health, we have 5G-ready initiatives that we can make available when sufficient spectrum resources are made available. For example, we have TELUS Health Exchange, which is a national standards-based open electronic communication platform that connects TELUS and third-party systems to deliver an array of new tools to health providers and citizens. With fair access to 600 megahertz spectrum, TELUS Health could further enable virtual care applications, including mobile health applications that will have positive impacts for patients in remote and rural communities, and savings to Canada's health system. These are just a few of the benefits that Canadians will be able to take advantage of, provided that sufficient amounts of spectrum are made available, and if non-neutral spectrum allocation policies...
Excuse me, Mr. McGarrah?
Yes.
Your time, you had 5 minutes total between the two, so I just would like you to finish your comments if you could.
Last sentence. Non-neutral spectrum allocation policies such as those proposed in the current 600 megahertz consultation document are eliminated. At TELUS Health, we hope to make the promise of 5G available to the broadest number of Canadians as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Guerrero. We'll go up, first of all, to Mr. Saini for 7 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you very much for coming here. I want to go back to some of the consultation papers that you guys had given to as your final submission to the brief, and I'll start with TELUS first. And I'm quoting, in your briefing, you said the DPPs do not render carriers gatekeepers of content. There's general agreement that because of a DPP, by definition, is unrelated to blocking content, there's no chance that a subscriber will be unable to access the content that he or she wants. So it says the entire internet remains available. The only difference is that is the price a consumer will pay for a given site. And this is, I'm taking directly from a brief that you had submitted, I think, about a year ago.
And that's a TELUS submission in the DPP?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just assuming, because I think this is something that there's some differences amongst all of you when it comes to DPP. And, assuming that a regime was permitted, for example, what, if anything, prevents an ISP from making a particular website prohibitively expensive rather than simply favoring one site over another with a price discount or a coupon?
Well, in the context of the DPP proceeding, we were looking not at that. Our business, the core of our business is providing connectivity to people to access the legal content of their choice. In the context of the statement that you just quoted, we were thinking not in the sense that you posed the question, but in the sense that if you wanted to price something differently to a customer who took more of your services. So, for example, there's a practice called zero rating, which my friend from Videotron attempted to.
The music streaming service.
Yeah. We felt that was was a legitimate practice, and that the regulatory regime should not prohibit ex ante offering consumers discounts or cheaper prices for services as a static rule. That was where we were.
But when you do that, and you let's say you put it in, you're offering certain websites or certain services, you're forsaking the other companies, and if it's prohibitively expensive, then you are indirectly steering the traffic to those websites or to those services with that price discount, whether it's zero-rated or whether it's sponsored data.
Theoretically, yes. I agree with you, sir. And that's why the broad discretion that some of the other folks have gone into in more detail that is encapsulated within Section 27 of the Telecommunications Act and gives us broad discretion to the CRTC to determine on a case-by-case basis. That is why that exists, and that's what protects Canadians from non-neutral practices. But generally speaking, for example, in virtually every, I'm sorry, I'm going overly expansive, but in a great number of jurisdictions in the world, these kinds of practices are, widespread. In the United States, T-Mobile offers unlimited access to a variety of curated websites, applications. That isn't an issue. In Canada, it would appear it is an issue. And I question whether that's the right course.
Well, what would be the strategic advantage of doing that? Because to me, it seems that what you're suggesting is that when you do that, there's a better deal for the customer. So you're looking at it in terms of a price point to say that if we offer this bulk of services, that there will be a discount for the consumer. My worry is that when you're doing that, you're forsaking other content that's on there because you're steering the traffic there. So if we look at net neutrality, the information should be equal to everybody, but indirectly through pricing and through that strategy, you're leading the consumer in one direction. So that's where my worry is.
You know, the most popular applications and services available today are available to everyone. They all grew up without net neutrality protections. Google, Facebook, Amazon, any of these. I think it's a hypothetical harm. I understand the premise on which your question is posed, but that is not the business we're in. And you've suggested that it's it's a pricing decision. Yes, because if you, sir, are a customer that pays us $40 a month for whatever range of services, and you, ma'am, are a customer that pays us $60 a month, we may wish, as a pricing decision or as a tool, a marketing tool, to give you a discount on accessing certain services. I think where you need to worry, I don't think that's a problem. In where I think you need to worry and where it would be important for the regulator, and they're obviously on this file, they've been very active on it, is around when there is an actual harm that is observed. And then I accept your premise.
So Ms. Dinsmore, I wanted to ask you the similar question, because you also submitted a brief. And I'm quoting from your brief. You said, permitting ISPIs to offer differential pricing data services essentially places them in the position of gatekeepers, deciding which internet services will thrive and which will not. This gatekeeping function is antithetical to the role of common carrier and would serve to undermine the principles of net neutrality. So can you give us your take on, because you've heard Mr. Woodhead's. Obviously, there's a difference of opinion.
Fair enough. When listening to what Ted's talking about, I think there's some conflation between what is a sort of a marketing practice and what is sort of a violation of net neutrality. So what Rogers does as a practice, and which we spoke about at the hearing, was that we will offer in certain circumstances a bundle of services. Maybe you take a certain level of television service, a certain level of internet service, as well as a telephone service, bundle those together, and with that we might provide you with something like a 6-month discount on your Netflix subscription. But it doesn't have anything to do with zero rating. We don't zero rate the bits that are associated with your use of that Netflix subscription, but for 6 months you might get it for half price. We might do the same thing with the Spotify
Mr. Senior, that's time.
subscription.
So next up.
That's the issue.
Yeah, thank you. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Kent.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for appearing before us today. One of the two dissenting FCC commissioners in December painted a pretty dire scene of the future given the potential changes, which, as Commissioner Rosenworcel said, as a result of today's misguided action, our broadband providers will get extraordinary new powers. And she went on to essentially say there would be a rather brutal economic survival of the fittest, and there would be major winners and major losers. And I'm just wondering whether any of your companies have since December done strategic analysis on the potential collateral damage, given the elephant and the mouse comparison and the size of the companies involved, and the fact that Canadian internet traffic very often moves through the United States. Have you done any analysis in any of your companies looking at the potential collateral damage?
We've done some analysis. We don't view this as some sort of existential threat. We believe that the internet is based as a dynamic technology that undoubtedly has changed the way we do business and communicate with each other globally as a global network. and its whole value, both on a commercial basis and on a societal basis, is about being open to the legal exchange of information.
Anyone else?
We haven't done a substantial analysis, but we have taken the position publicly that as far as Rogers is concerned, we don't believe this will have an impact on Canadians' access to U.S. websites. Where it might have an impact is whether if Canadians are doing business in the U.S. or if Canadians are trying to retail their products and services into the U.S. and the ISPs, for whatever reason, decide to favor some content over another, which, by the way, this legislation is still a long way from being passed and is probably going to be challenged in the courts. So the road is still, evolving. That may happen. That may happen. We may find that applications that might otherwise have been developed won't be developed if that happens. We may find that app developers come to Canada because of our robust net neutrality regime. So these are all things that are within the realm of possibility, but so far nothing has changed because the order, although it's been repealed by the FCC, has not yet been passed by Congress or signed by Trump, and the court challenges haven't yet been heard.
I would say that I'm not aware of any specific analysis, excuse me, done in that regard. Clearly, we're very aware of where our traffic goes, where our peering points are, et cetera. But similar to what Pam just said, I think I would say it's best to say we're in wait-and-see mode right now on that point.
And from a Bell perspective, I think Ms. Dinsmore was correct. I think if there is an impact, the impact will be on Canadian entities using the U.S. pipeline, for lack of a better phrase, and they may experience an increased cost of doing business as a result of the ability of ISPs south of the border, perhaps to charge for differentially for bandwidth. But in Canada, due to our robust net neutrality laws that I referred to, it will be business as usual in Canada, and the pipeline will operate in a neutral fashion under the CRTC's rules.
Monsieur Gourde, des questions? No? When the CRTC appeared before us last week, we were reassured that there are regular international meetings, discussions between companies like yours, companies in Europe and in the United States. And I'm wondering if since December your companies have engaged with Europeans, for example, to get their opinions, their input, their feedback on their reaction to the FCC decision.
We have not been in discussions with foreign carriers about this at all. And Mr. Seidel, perhaps perhaps I misinterpreted it, but I believed he was referring to the fact that the CRTC is in communication with other regulators internationally. We have had no discussions on a company-to-company basis about this.
I mean, I think it's important to recognize that as ISPs, we operate here in Canada, and we are subject in our operations to the rules that exist here in Canada. I think it's extremely interesting to follow what's going on in different parts of the world, and certainly with the U.S. right next door, that's even more interesting, especially in the context of NAFTA ongoing and the discussions around that. But we're subject to the Canadian regime. So what's going on over there is interesting, but can be somewhat academic if there are zero rating plans happening in Europe and various countries, or with these changes in the United States. That's not going to change the way we operate here in Canada, given our robust net neutrality regime.
I'm not aware of any specific company-to-company exchanges on that point, no.
So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kent. Next up for 7 minutes, Mr. Mass.
Delegations for being here today. Just carrying a little bit on with the FCC here, and is it potential, I guess, one of the repercussions of the decision still hasn't translated into reality yet, but that could actually act as a non-tariff barrier for Canadian competition, not only just in our agreement with the Americans, but also too internationally. If we are now having to compete and we have issues related to throttling, for example, when dealing with American companies or Canadian subsidiary companies that have parent companies in the United States.
We have thought about this, and certainly in an era of the digital economy where the internet plays such an important role, it would be an extremely great ambition to have similar net neutrality regimes in the countries with which you do trade, so that the businesses that are, in our case, Canadian, who are doing business with our trading partners' country, we would have the same net neutrality regimes, and ergo our websites wouldn't be throttled, et cetera, as you're alluding to. We're aware that this issue was raised in December by Steve Verheuel. We're not aware of where that's going to go. We haven't seen the text of the CPTPP nor that of NAFTA. When we do, it will be interesting to see whether this notion is captured, but in the context of what's happening in the U.S., it's difficult to see how you're going to get the horse back in the barn through a trade deal when you've already got this running down the track through Congress.
I don't think I really have anything to add to what Pam said, other than, you raised an interesting point that was brought up by Professor Geist when he appeared, I believe, in December. To the extent that theoretical harm could occur, it's not really a telecom regulation issue; it's a trade issue. And
no, I understand that, but it does affect a number of things. I want to move over to, I guess, deciding, I guess, interpretation of legal content, and then you've all claimed that the current rules should stay the same in the same framework. But how do you base your decision making, or what will we, if internet traffic and competition becomes an issue, in terms of prioritization of what I guess it's being used for? You mentioned, Mr. Greer, medical devices and medical treatment, but there's now more going on. There's much more use of devices that have not only just consumer interest, but also, autonomous cars, vehicles, real-time analysis for emergency response, and so forth. How do you determine whether or not there's enough response capable in there, Mr. Woodhead?
Well, obviously, the way I address this kind of stuff is, and it's a very good question, sir, because it begs an answer that's like, you kind of play in a field of I know it when I see it. Our health applications, like, is that a reasonable prioritization? Like, if you're rolling out, or a hospital district wants to do remote home monitoring, is that a reasonable thing to give some priority for? I haven't looked at it, but I suspect yes. Does the federal government ask for priority on the public safety broadband network that they have an RFP out for at the moment? Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I would like to hear everyone respond to on this is in terms of legal content and blocking our legal content. And I guess even just a general question, I think people, when in the court system do you decide, or do you determine, when you should follow, I guess, the law? Is it, and I don't know the answer to this question, but is it is it during an appeal process? Is it during, like, what determine a legal case goes forward on content or a website, It has been challenged. It goes to the court, to one level of court, or it goes to the United States court. What point do you determine whether this should be removed or impeded in terms of your site provision to your servicers?
Sorry, I guess I have my microphone on. So I think what you're asking is if an ISP is ordered to block a website by a court, at what stage do they actually do that blocking if in fact that decision gets appealed?
Yes.
And presumably...
Sorry, I could have phrased it a lot easier than that.
No, it's a fair question. And presumably we would be obliged under a blocking order to block a given website unless there was a stay to the order that was applied for by the website provider, in which case if there was a stay of the decision pending the appeal and the conclusion of the appeal, then we would not block that website for that time period. But unless there was a stay to the decision, we would be obliged to block. And we would never, as an ISP, in this context, we wouldn't block unless there was a blocking order. We wouldn't take it upon ourselves to make the determination on whether content is legal or illegal. We would await the court order, and ergo, we would follow it.
And is that the same? I get a lot of questions about that. Has there been any cases where, or has that been the standard practice of everyone to follow that?
I would say that in 99.9999999% of the cases, because there aren't a lot of these cases where we do this kind of stuff, that is the case. But there might be theoretically and probably actually an example or two over a couple of decades where in what are termed exigent circumstances, certain things are done because it's a threat to life or property.
For 7 minutes, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Thanks very much. It's probably that 0.00001% of cases that happened in 2005 with TELUS. It's interesting that we're talking about net neutrality, but we haven't talked about the fair play proposal. So, and nobody raised it. So I've got a constituent email, Joseph Travato. He writes, I'm writing to voice concern over the Bell Coalition's website blocking proposal to the CRTC. Censorship of the internet is not something that I can support. Bell, as a content producer and service provider, should not have the power to limit access to any content. And so perhaps, directed to Bell and to Rogers, you can explain how the fair play proposal is consistent with net neutrality.
Thank you for the question. So the fair play proposal, which is not, I know you referred to it and others have referred to it as the Bell proposal. It's not. That doesn't reflect the broad constituency of members of the various participants in the cultural community that have participated actively in this, ranging from actors, unions, guilds, production companies, theater festivals, broadcasters. So it really is quite a broad coalition of participants. And I think that reflects the understanding amongst the industry of just how serious the piracy problem is in Canada and what a threat it is to the cultural industries that employ thousands of Canadians. So in terms of the proposal itself, it's not a net neutrality issue. As Minister Baines has said, net neutrality is about the free flow of legal content over networks. The fair play proposal is addressing something I think everyone agrees is illegal, that is content theft and copyright infringement, and asks the regulator to consider, given the difficulties of enforcing against copyright pirates, especially those that reside offshore, the fair play proposal asks the CRTC to consider whether or not those pirate sources, which are blatant, egregious commercial sources of piracy, should be blocked. And why is that the remedy? Quite honestly, it's the most practical and expedient remedy is to block these websites as they come in.
So I'll put the question, a similar question to Ms. Dinsmore. So Mr. Geis has written, the government and the CRTC should not hesitate to firmly reject the website blocking plan as a disproportionate, unconstitutional policy, sorely lacking in due process that is inconsistent with the current communications law framework. Perhaps you can explain to us why the current law is insufficient.
I mean, I think happily there are voices that are being raised that are counter to Professor Geis, so there are lots of arguments on the other side. If you read other blogs by people like Hugh Stevens and Barry Sookman. That said, there is an enormous amount of due process built into the application. The organization that would be set up is set up because it's an expedient way with experts to deal with the triage of the applications that would come in. But ultimately, and there would be transparency and there would be a public proceeding in that process, but ultimately the Internet Piracy Review Agency would make a recommendation back to the CRTC, and the CRTC itself would make the decision as to whether or not a website should be put on the block list and therefore required to be blocked by the ISPs. The pirate or the alleged pirate would have the full panoply of remedies available to him if he disagreed with, or she disagreed with, the determination of the Commission. They could ask for a review and vary. They could appeal the decision to the Federal Court of Appeal, just as in any other case that comes before the CRTC.
Can I ask, an answer to Mr. Massey's questions? You indicated that the status quo is there's a court order and a website gets taken down. And what are the deficiencies in the current takedown process with court actions?
You mean the notice regime under the Copyright Act?
Right. So why is that particular process so deficient that we need a new regime?
That process is not deficient when we're talking about downloads. And last year, as an example, Rogers delivered 2,400,000 notices to end users. So that process is working very well when we're talking about people who download copyrighted content. What it doesn't work for is streaming. And streaming has arisen as being the most used way of consumers accessing pirated content since the Copyright Act was brought in 5 years ago. So the notice and notice regime cannot, it's the detection of streaming that doesn't work in a notice and notice context, and therefore it is not a useful method.
Do you have a list of websites you could share with this committee that you think should be blocked?
I don't have a list on hand right now.
Okay, well, if you could share a list with the committee after the fact, I'd also be interested, where does it stop? Do we block VPNs? Do we block torrents? At what point do we stop blocking particular content or services that are related to legal activity a lot of the time?
I mean, I think the issue is who's we, and the issue here
governments.
The issue here is an independent agency of the government as making a determination as to whether or not a given site is blatantly and egregiously engaging in dissemination of pirated content.
We had CRTC before us and Mr. Geis before us previously, and I put the same question to the CRTC about enshrining the current principles. I think everyone, the CRTC included, Mr. Geis, yourselves, have all said the current regime is important, it works. We're not asking the current regime to change with respect to 27 sub 2 or 36, but does it make sense to enshrine the principle of net neutrality in the law, or would that be superfluous?
We don't see a need to do that. We think it is somewhat superfluous because the beauty in the existing regime is that it allows for the Commission to look at situations on a case-by-case basis as technology evolves and determine whether or not it is or not in violation of the Commission's net neutrality principles. 5G, the upcoming network slicing requirements are going to be front center in that. And there one would argue when, as Ted said, one has to allocate more, lower latency to medical examples and maybe less data if you're merely looking at, dealing with parking meters. The Commission's going to have to, someone will probably say that that is a violation of net neutrality. In fact, it won't be because there's no discrimination. It's just the fact that your network in 5G is used differently for different purposes. That is a very good example of why it is that we need to have a very flexible regime going forward so that we can deal with all of these new technologies that are coming down the pipe.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Next up, for 5 minutes, Ms. Gourde.
Merci aux témoins d'être ici ce matin.
Thank you to the witnesses for appearing this morning. I have a general question addressed to all of the witnesses. We've discussed net neutrality and the notion that there might be issues with external competition. And of course, we're dealing with net neutrality as an issue that is free access to the net, and comparative size of the market, American and Canadian, of course, creates a little bit of a problem for us. Perhaps in 5 or 10 years from now, we won't have any Canadian presence at all on these international markets. I didn't quite hear your question. Well, today we talk about net neutrality, and we have a lot of good standard bearers for that. We have Rogers, Bell, etc. We have to deal with our American neighbors, and can these companies, might these companies disappear? And net neutrality disappear for the Canadian? Well, you mean as with their status as ISPs? Yes. Well, there are some basic protections that would, of course, protect us from being completely eliminated as Canadian companies. The Canadian spectrum is under the management of the federal government. And in passing, I wouldn't mind to have an opportunity to respond to my colleagues from TELUS's concept, this innovative concept of net neutrality that he introduced this morning. But to answer your question, sir, Canadian suppliers, ISP, are well established within the context of Canadian law, the framework of Canadian law, and the access to the most important of the resources, the spectrum, is, as I say, under Canadian management, under Canadian control. There is some potential impact, of course, on Canadian suppliers if Americans begin to manage their interconnectivity or internet traffic management in a discriminatory fashion. There's potential for damage, I suppose. But we haven't seen what the American intentions are and what the trends are. We haven't seen any impact yet on Canadian suppliers of Canadian content either. We'll have to follow the case very closely over time. And on net neutrality, consequences or repercussions for neutrality, you wanted to add something on that? You said your colleague's concept?
Wish, if you don't mind, to this innovative concept of spectrum neutrality. In my remarks on net neutrality, I mentioned that there's probably a different definition of net neutrality for each intervener. Well, spectrum neutrality, I think you would see multiple definitions as well. If I were to take on the subject, I would begin perhaps with the fact that in the 1980s, the largest and most valuable swath of low-frequency spectrum was granted, mark the word granted, not auctioned, granted to Canada's 3 largest wireless companies. How neutral is that? If I were to engage in a debate about spectrum neutrality, I might want to take that on and hear about TELUS's point of view. We have authorities in Canada in the industry department that have shown competence over many years determining how spectrum is allocated in this country, determining an appropriate balance of low, medium, high frequency spectrum among the multiple carriers, incumbents, and new entrants. They've done a very good job. They continue to do a very good job, and we see the results concretely in terms of, for example, prices paid for wireless services by Canadians. In Quebec, prices are lower than the rest of Canada, and that's not just Videotron's prices. The incumbents' prices are lower in Quebec than in the rest of Canada. So if we want to engage in a debate about spectrum neutrality and the impacts of alternative spectrum neutrality approaches, Videotron would welcome the occasion. We would come back for you. We would spend the whole day with you if you'd like to discuss that subject.
Thank you, Mr. Gord. Next up for 5 minutes, Ms. Vandenbille.
Yes, thank you. And actually, I'd like to continue on with that question for a moment about the spectrum neutrality, because Mr. Belland, we're hearing from you that there might be very good reasons, particularly for consumers with pricing. And Mr. Woodhead, you indicated, I believe, if I'm not paraphrasing incorrectly, that spectrum neutrality and net neutrality are actually not, they are part of the same thing. So if I could, I'm hearing two different things. So if I could have all of you comment on that, and what would be the rationale in terms of having the proposal that's coming from Innovation Canada, and then what would be the impact, positive or negative, on your ISPs? Mr. Belland? Or, sorry.
Since I started it, I suppose.
Sure. Okay.
I should
Yeah.
Go. My point here is simply that the thrust of what our presentation was, outside of a very critical piece of it, which is health, and what net neutrality means for delivering very, very socially critical services, was that net neutrality isn't an issue in Canada. It just isn't. It's been enshrined in legislation since 1906. My secondary point was simply that, and maybe I'll phrase it a different way, I find it curious that companies controlled by family-controlled cable companies controlled by billionaires are being offered spectrum on a preferential basis that is critical to the delivery of services in rural areas, and in particular using the use case that Dr. Guerriere mentioned. That's my point in a nutshell, ma'am.
Mr. Belland?
You know, spectrum allocation is obviously critically important, and the best way I can describe it to you is I've personally sat in the spectrum auction war rooms at Quebecor, every auction since 2008, and when Quebecor is bidding on spectrum, we're looking at it through one calculus, which is, what is our business case for using this spectrum, providing services to Quebecers in our case? How much is it going to cost, and can we make that work? That's our calculus. When incumbent carriers who were in the market 20 more years before us are sitting in their war room, they actually have two calculuses. One is the same as ours, which is, what's the spectrum worth to us in terms of providing services? What's the business case? How much is it going to cost? Does that calculus work? Their second calculus is what economists refer to as the foreclosure incentive, which is, how much can I hurt this new guy, this disruptive new guy, by keeping low frequency spectrum out of his hands? And they add together those two calculuses, and that's how they come up with their bids. And that's the sort of inequity, that's the sort of distortion, that's the sort of non-neutrality that the industry department addresses through pro-competitive measures in the auction design, which, by the way, are widespread across the world. Don't let anyone tell you that purely free market spectrum auctions are the norm in the world. It's precisely the inverse. Very rarely do you see purely free market spectrum auctions across the world.
Okay.
Thanks for that. The point, then, I guess, let's look at this a bit objectively. Videotron bought 700 megahertz and 2,500 megahertz outside of the province of Quebec. It never deployed it. It bought it at subsidized prices. It's a Canadian public resource that is owned by all taxpayers in this country. And if memory serves, they sold it for $430 million to Shaw. If that is the efficient use of a public resource, then someone else can explain it to me, but I don't believe it is.
I don't want to start a debate here. I did actually want. I did actually want to.
I thought
ask
this
about
is where
the US.
debates happen.
It is where debates. And I think this is something we'll
Mrs.
require.
Vanderbilt, your time is
I'm
up.
out of time. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up for 5 minutes, Mr. Kent.
I cede my time, Chair.
Okay. We'll go to Ms. Fortier for 5 minutes.
Bonjour, merci beaucoup d'être avec.
Good morning, and thank you for being here this morning. I think everybody will jump for those little earpieces. Now, we understand that digital space is always in constant evolution. We know that the CRTC is consolidating its commitment towards the net neutrality. That's the reality today. One of my major concerns is to protect the consumer, and that ISPs and other suppliers ensure that Canadians have equitable access to content, particularly Francophone content, everywhere in Canada, particularly Quebec. Now, in order to ensure that, what are you doing to protect Canadians in that particular context, in net neutrality? That would be my first question, and you may each have a shot at an answer.
And I'll respond in English. It's interesting because when we went to the differential pricing practices proceeding, one of the issues there was, should the Commission require or allow for the prioritization of Canadian content, whether it be French language content or English language content. This has come up a number of times in CRTC proceedings on this issue. And I think, as Chris Seidel pointed out the other day, the Commission decided not to go down that path in its decision, and decided that it would be very difficult for an ISP to actually do that, to determine what is the definition of Canadian content that meets the test that gets prioritized. There's a lot of content out there. Some is Canadian by CAVCO rules, some is not. It all depends. So neither did the Commission go down the path of allowing us to favor things like internet relay service for the deaf. So there were some very good social goods that were considered at the time at that proceeding, and the Commission ultimately came out and said the only things that can be zero rated are data usage and billing. So that's where we end up on that one.
Merci. Monsieur Bélan?
Je peux vous répondre peut-être un peu dans la contexte.
Well, I'll try to answer you in the context of unlimited music that was unfortunately eliminated. In the design of that program, we were quite aware and sensitive to the issue of net neutrality when we designed this program. One thing that we did was to open it up to all music content providers who would meet certain technical criteria. And they were not very difficult criteria to meet. So it's a basic underlying principle, we thought, would enable us to provide this service as zero rated. Would be to open it to all those who are capable of meeting the technical criteria that could actually provide. We had 18 various music providers at a certain point, content providers. And we were able to perhaps favor Canadian services in one language or another. That issue had never come up, was never on the table, really. But what we did do at Videotron, we made a particular effort to go out and find Canadian suppliers and to inform them of the possibility that they would have to disseminate their music. Well, a little quickly, I have another, I'd like to hear from the others. Mr. Malcolmson.
We're an integrated company, so we have media business and the ISP business, but acting as an ISP, we're content agnostic. We deliver the content that rides on our network, provide it to consumers with the highest quality networks and best user experience possible. So that's wearing our ISP hat. When similar to Videotron, we did look at some what we thought were innovative content offerings. The best example is Bell Mobile TV. We offered an extension of our television service on the wireless network to customers, and because the customers were paying for the content on that service, the data usage associated with the consumption of that content was zero rated. Ultimately, the CRTC determined that in doing that, we were treating one class of customers differently than others by zero rating that content. We disagreed with that decision, but I go through it because it shows a couple of things. First of all, it shows how robust our net neutrality rules are and how vigilant the CRTC is in enforcing them. And it also shows, I think, the need, when you're thinking about changes to our net neutrality laws, the need to maintain the flexibility that exists in the existing regime. Because just like mobile TV was something new at the time, any of us at this table don't know what is coming 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road. And when innovative applications come up that will benefit the consumers that you worry about, I think service providers should be given an opportunity to try them out. And ultimately, if the regulator feels they're in any way discriminatory, they have the existing tools, and they've used the existing tools, both with Videotron and with us, to tell us when we've crossed that line.
Thank you, Madame Fortier. We do have some time, so we have Mr. Messier next, but there is about 30 minutes left in terms of time for questions, so if you want to get put back on the list, please let me know. Mr. Messier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to our witnesses. I want to follow up with fair play, Mr. Malcolmson. With regards to, it was a broad coalition that came forth with the proposal of the CRTC. I guess if you don't get what you want with that, what's the next best option in your opinion in terms of being fair from the perspective of the creators? I have a lot of concern over some of the things that have taken place with regards to piracy, but often it's also been a good example is in my area where we had satellite from the United States that was accessed was from poor practices from the companies from doing any type of research or whatever, and it turned into a policing problem for the Canadian side versus that of a weak system on the U.S. But what would be your next step then if in terms of a fair play option that would be good for a balance?
Well, we hope we don't get to that. The next step that you've asked me about, we think that the fair play proposal, given the existing range of remedies that are available, is an important addition because it's practical, it's effective, it lets us reach beyond our borders to find and block incoming pirate streams. So that's why we've proposed it. We think it's effective. In terms of what the future may hold if we're unsuccessful, I suppose as we go through the reform of the Copyright Act, there may be more statutory remedies that could help the cause. But at the end of the day, unless you can block these pirate sites at their source, it's going to be a very, very uphill battle to be able to combat this problem. And just to give you a snapshot of the extent of the problem, I don't know if you're familiar, but there are streaming services called Kodi set-top boxes, and when you can buy one of those from your local electronics retailer, and I think they retail for somewhere in the $50 to $100 range. And when you buy one of those, you instantly get access through a bunch of add-ons of pirate applications to streams of content owned by the people around this table. And I think the latest statistics from Sandvine were that 7% of Canadian television households are now using these Kodi boxes. So it is a pervasive problem, and the content has to be stopped at the entry point. And as ISPs, we're all well positioned to, when ordered to do so, after there's been a finding, not by us, but by the CRTC, that a site is a legitimate pirate site, ISPs are able to engage in that blocking.
I think the challenge that's faced is it's always another system that comes in place. In fact, I mean, we don't raise these in our trade missions abroad. They're very rarely part of trade agreements when we discuss these things. I mean, most of the stuff comes from, not all of it, but a great deal from China. You know, and we do have other, I mean, this is part of a larger debate about ideal in the automotive sector, and we have copyrighted parts. We have, you know, copied materials that are going into hospitals and counterfeiting from everything that says Canadian standards on it and so forth. So, I mean, this happens to be predominantly in the entertainment industry that Canadian consumers are choosing to go to, but it's actually at our dollar stores and so forth. But I do want to move to one quick...
Mr. Massey, your time is up. If you want to come back around.
I would if I have one quick question for the rest of the
Yeah, you bet. So we have Mr. Erskine-Smith, Madame Fortier, and Mr. Massey, and that's all I have on my list so far. So please go ahead, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Thanks very much. So I wanted to pick up again on Mr. Massey's conversation, and I understand it's easier to, Ms. Dinsmore, you were mentioning it's easier to go after sites where people are downloading, and it's more difficult to tackle streaming, but it's not entirely clear to me how setting up a new body makes it easier to tackle these streaming sites. And perhaps you could explain why you're currently unable to identify a streaming site where there's illegal content available for streaming, and you can't go to court or to the CRTC to have that shut down.
So just to help understand what the notice and notice system is that was enshrined in our Copyright Modernization Act 5 years ago, this is a practice that ISPs were engaged in voluntarily for about 10 years before that, and it's a solution that's sort of not as drastic, one might say, as the notice and takedown regime in the US under their Digital Millennium Act. But basically what happens is a rights holder will send to the ISP a URL that we then act as a post office, match it to tombstone information, i.e. a customer's email address, and we act simply to pass that note on to the end user, which tells the end user that the rights holder is aware that the end user is downloading their content illegally. That's effectively what happens. These are all done automatically. The match is done automatically. We don't even see these notices. They just pass right through our system. That's the notice and notice system. So it informs the end user that the rights holder is aware that the end user is downloading their content and it's infringing their copyright. That cannot work in a streaming context because the software isn't there to make that detection. So it just is ineffective. So,
but quite from going after the end user, what precludes you from going after the hosting of that site?
First of all, we're not going after the end user.
Well, you're going to, the blocking a website.
The right, in the notice and notice context, the rights holder is informing the end user that the end user may or may not know that what they are viewing online is that rights holder's copyrighted content. That's what's going on in the notice and notice regime.
Right.
So if you said, can we extend that to streaming, whereby the rights holder could inform?
No, that's not, I don't think that's the question, though. The question is, you have a proposal to allow this independent body to take down websites. Where there's illegal activity, you can make an application to court to have a court order that a website be taken down. Why is that insufficient, is the question.
Can I take a stab at that, sir? So I think it's important to point out that under the Telecommunications Act, there's a specific provision, Section 36, which Parliament has empowered the CRTC as the expert telecommunications regulator to make determination, to authorize ISPs to interfere or block traffic. So, to your question, why aren't you going to court? Why aren't judicial remedies sufficient enough? Even if there were a perfect toolkit of legal remedies, at the end of the day, anyone seeking to block access to illegal content would also have to go through the CRTC. So, one of the considerations in the Fair Play application is we have an independent regulator. That independent regulator recently in the Quebec anti-gambling law case declared that if there is going to be any blocking of internet content, all roads go through the CRTC. The CRTC has to authorize it. So when the coalition formed the Fair Play proposal, there was recognition that the CRTC is in the middle of this and has to authorize this, in addition to any judicial remedies that may otherwise exist.
Okay, so the CRTC is currently empowered by Section 36, as you say, to give permission, so it's accept with the permission of the CRTC, to give you permission to block sites. Has there been an instance where you've done the due diligence, you've proven with documentation that a certain site has made illegal material available, you've taken it to the CRTC and they've taken no action?
Well, that's what this proposal is all about. Rather than coming to the CRTC on a one-off basis, we thought a holistic proposal from a broad-based group of stakeholders would give the CRTC the best opportunity to have a look at its implications and consider it on a fulsome basis. So that's exactly what it's about, but we haven't gone on a one-off basis.
So it's a proposal to set up an independent agency under the auspices of the CRTC, though we haven't attempted bringing material to the CRTC to say this is infringing and ask the CRTC to take action in the first instance at all. We were developing this alternative proposal separate and apart.
Well, as I said, I think the coalition's view is this type of fulsome proposal makes the most sense. You create an independent agency which has some expertise.
Okay, I have one question completely unrelated, but we were talking about Spectrum, and I'm a tech-savvy customer. I've never downloaded the Hurt Locker, but I'm a tech-savvy customer, and tech-savvy being a reseller of the Rogers network, why would the same thing not work from a competition and a consumer perspective for mobile networks? I don't know if anyone wants to answer that question.
Can you clarify what the question is?
Yeah, so the idea of resell, so we've got more competition in the space of for internet service providers, tech-savvy being mine, because they're able to access network and resell Rogers network. And why would the same thing from a consumer competition perspective not work for mobile networks?
Talking about Wi-Fi first type providers, MVNOs, resale of wireless networks, is that the gist of the question?
That would be the gist of the question, yeah.
Okay. Well, there's currently a proceeding before the CRTC that has taken place regarding whether or not Canada should have a Wi-Fi first providers in Canada. That's ongoing. I believe we've probably all intervened in that proceeding and provided our views. From a Rogers perspective, we don't think it's necessary. We already have low-cost plans out there in the marketplace that allow access to Wi-Fi as low as $10. But our view is that it will not be good for investment. The example in Europe has been that it has not been good for investment from facilities-based carriers. We will await the ruling of the CRTC. Our thoughts were it would be better to have a targeted voucher program to low-income families that might need that boost. But that process is underway right now, and that decision is pending.
Thank you, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Next up, Madam Fortier.
Yes, the question, I'd like to have Mr. Woodhead answer my previous question, if you remember it. If not, I can repeat it for you. No problem. There seems to be a constant evolution of the digital space, the digital world. We know that the CRTC has decided to consolidate its commitment vis-a-vis net neutrality issues. That's happening today. One of my concerns would be the protection of consumers and to ensure that they have access to content, francophone content, everywhere in Canada, not only in Quebec. And I was wondering what your position would be on how we can ensure that there can be an equality of access to content by all Canadians throughout the country.
And I was interested in it, and I was interested in your question for a very strange reason, because it brought me back to almost 10 years I spent at the CRTC as a policy analyst. First, and Dennis's comments reminded me of it too, the general issue of promotion of Canadian content is an interesting one and an important one. Bell and Videotron are big content producers, for example, in the French language. And what you see in Quebec in terms of the consumption of content and by people like what we should be concerned about, it is very high. And largely that's, I think, probably for linguistic reasons. English Canada is more exposed to American content, and it has to compete on a basis with American content. How do we deal with that? Generally, we all deal with that through mandatory carriage rules of mandatory services that have Canadian content quotas that they are required to broadcast. At TELUS, and I'm sorry for the long answer, but at TELUS, we're a bit different than some of the other, all of the other companies here because we don't actually own content resources, but we do it through promotion of what is branded for us as TELUS Stories. And those are available online and tell Canadian stories. They tell Canadian stories of Syrian refugees. They tell all kinds of interesting stories about accessibility and all kinds of things. So that's my answer.
Merci. Je peux vous dire tous que pour moi, c'est très...
Thank you. I can tell you all that it's a big concern for me what's happening to Francophone content outside of Quebec. Canada has 2 official languages. Net neutrality is an issue of itself, of course, but has fantastic repercussions on Canadian content for Francophones in particular. So I hold it close to my heart. Have you received any complaints vis-a-vis concerning net neutrality from any of your subscribers? And if so, how did you handle them? Well, perhaps a bit more quickly across the board, Madam Dinsmore.
Following the 2009 ITMP decision, for a time period, Rogers decided that it would throttle upstream traffic, BitTorrent traffic. And unfortunately, that had an impact on some gaming applications because they too were using peer-to-peer technology. As a result, some of the gamers got aggravated, the net neutrality activists got motivated, the Commission decided to investigate, and Rogers dealt with a number of complaints, particularly around games like World of Warcraft, which require very fast response time. We dealt with those complaints. We ultimately abandoned our throttling in 2012 because we were able to build more capacity into the network. So since then, the complaints have slowed down to a trickle. So it was really a very specific issue that people were concerned about that we addressed at the time.
Rapidement, Monsieur Bellin.
Il y a très peu de consommateurs qui vont...
Very few consumers will call us up or complain about net neutrality per se. But we do receive complaints. But it's usually when there was the forced withdrawal of musique illimitée, unlimited music. We had to manage the situation. We didn't contest the decision. We offered some other benefits in exchange to our clients who lost that particular service, and it went very well for the most part.
No, I think that, well, with one exception, and it's an exception I mentioned earlier, which is the Bell Mobile TV offering. I think some of, as Ms. Dinsmore calls them, the internet activists complained to the CRTC. Ultimately, the CRTC ruled against us, and that required us to begin to charge data for that service to consumers, which made it less attractive to consumers, which we thought was unfortunate. But that's probably the best example of a net neutrality complaint.
Mr. Woodhead?
We don't throttle, we don't do deep packet inspection, we do none of that stuff. So the broad answer is no. I think the Chris Seidel from the CRTC said, I think in his comments, that they've received 19 complaints. This is an issue without a country. But and I'll just go right there. In 2005, so 13 years ago, during a prolonged labor disruption, and I think Mr. Erskine-Smith referred to it, we blocked a website called Voices for Change. We simultaneously sought approval, sought an injunction from the Alberta Court of Queen's Bench. An injunction was issued 48 hours later, and the content was taken down. That particular incident is used and trotted out by internet activists as the poster child for the end of the world and internet as we know it. If you believe that is the end of the world and the internet as we know it, Godspeed. But I think actually it is what it is.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup,
Thank you,
Monsieur le
Mrs.
Président.
Fortune. Next up, Mr. Massey.
Quick question on decisions about legality and not legality. You had a bill that failed here in Parliament, a single event sports betting bill. One of the challenges that we faced was the fact that you could do this online so quickly and so easily. You could bet right here. So if it's against the law in Canada, how are those sites being prohibited or not being prohibited on your provision of services? I'm just curious as to, why is it that right now, DraftKings, other types of betting services that are out there, and others that actually have single event sports betting where it's been not changed in Canada. Ironically, we'll have other changes in laws like smoking marijuana, but you still can't bet on a single event sport bet game, but you can still do it online through offshore betting and accounts that don't pay Canadian taxes. Some of them are related to organized crime that are hosting on your sites right now. So I'd like an answer from all of you as to why those sites aren't taken down, especially the ones that are connected to organized crime or money laundering.
I'll start. Without commenting on the particular sites that you mentioned.
No, that was not. Those are examples of something else. But
all of us as ISPs, as I said earlier, are content agnostic. So the content that travels over our network is not censored, monitored, controlled by us. So we're simply delivering the connectivity from point A to point B. So obviously, if there was a regulatory order or a court order requiring us to do something about that type of traffic, we would certainly abide by it. But really, that's our role is to provide connectivity.
I'll just add, because you may or may not be aware that in Quebec, there's a law yet to be declared in force, but that would require ISPs in Quebec to block gambling sites that are not Espace Jeu sites, which is the provincial gambling organization. And there's a challenge to that from the CWT, the Wireless Association, the Canadian Wireless Association, on the premise that that jurisdiction lies with the Commission to require an ISP to block something, as we've heard today, versus the Quebec government, not to even mention how difficult it might be for those of us who operate national networks to isolate only one portion of our network, which isn't configured provincially, to block only in that province. So there's an example where a province has taken some action, but it's now an issue that's in the courts for jurisdictional purposes and reasons.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Doesn't look like we have any further questions or comments, so I want to thank you, Ms. Dinsmore, Mr. Bellan, Mr. Malcolmson, and Mr. Woodhead, and Mr. Guerriere for your time today. We'll just briefly suspend and go into committee business and go into camera. Thank you.